some new faces. This is really lovely. So we are back in the third of our artist talks today. We're back with Laura Plant. She's a designer, an artist, a maker, and based here in Staffordshire. Laura is one of our fresh talent resident artists. So we have had the absolute pleasure of working with Laura for the last 2 years. But our journey starts with Laura much earlier than that. So back in 2017, whenever I first started working with BCB, Laura was a volunteer at the time. You were doing your MA in ceramics, and so was just such a friendly person, so warm, and was just so enthusiastic about ceramics and about the festival. And then, since then, 2017, then you came back, BCB 2019, as an exhibitor in Fresh, our early career artist exhibition, and you supported the install, you supported the invigilation, you supported a particular installation of work by an artist called Lauren Epps, and you helped with the de-install. And then we couldn't miss a trick to work with you again, and now you're back working with us, BCB 2021. For those who are here with us in person and online, Laura has a fantastic body of work as part of the festival. It's on the lower basement level. Highly recommend going to see it and experiencing it. So Laura, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us and talking more about your practice and your career.
Oh, hello. Thank you for having me.
So to start us off, it would be really lovely to learn about where clay started for you.
So the first time I used clay was at school. The local high school had a kiln and kind of ceramics facilities, and they came in and did a day at primary school, kind of making masks, I think it was. And then there's like a little bit of using clay when I went to high school, but it wasn't until I did my foundation at Newcastle College that I kind of really fell in love with it. And ironically, I chose to specialise in ceramics because it was like a pragmatic decision, that it was the thing that would let me do a bit of everything. So I was like, oh, this makes sense. And then by the time I came to applying to university, I loved it and went on to study ceramics.
So you did your BA in Camberwell College in London? And then was your degree specifically in ceramics?
Yes, so pure ceramics, I guess. So we did everything. I kind of specialised in hand building and throwing at the time. And my graduate work was all quite sculptural. And then when I left, I had a studio for a year, and I found kind of juggling paying studio rent in London and working, and not really, I loved my first degree, but it didn't really prepare me for what would come next. So I sort of ended up falling out of love a bit with what I was doing, moved back to Stoke, got a job and sort of was saving up, and then started doing ceramics again as a hobby before I decided to go back and do my MA.
Oh, that's amazing. And can happen, can't it, to fall out, but sometimes to fall out of being creative, and sometimes that happens, but there's also a really positive part of it in that that time spent is valuable still in building a maturity and practice. And then you came back, you were back in Stoke, did your MA at Staffordshire University, and I find it so interesting that you started off sculpturally, and then the work that we see from you now. Anyway, so you came back to Stoke, did your MA at Staffordshire, and how was that for you?
It was amazing. So the reason I chose to go to Staff's uni was because I started realising that I was really inspired. I've always gone to the Pottery Museum since I was tiny, and started realising that actually I was really inspired by that. And it was this sort of shift in what I was interested in and that was why I picked Stoke. Like, why would I go anywhere else? Kind of, it made complete sense to study here. So this is some of the MA work that I made. So I sort of focused on surface pattern design in the first year, like lots of blue and white, looking at wildflowers and sort of trying to, I guess, bring my sort of take to Stoke's heritage in my own sort of way, and sort of fell back in love with glaze tests. And then the piece, or the collection on the bottom right, is a collection I made for the National Trust just after I graduated. which is sort of the thing that got me into or thinking that I could become a maker. I'd sort of intended to become a designer and then realised that actually I really wanted to make.
And then was it at the same time then that you undertook the residency in China?
Yes, if you go to the next slide. So just after graduating, I very lucky got to go to China with the BCB and Staffordshire University. It was a month in China working with a company called Honav, and making and designing pieces that were inspired by our experiences of Beijing. So we literally spent a week going around all of the museums in Beijing, saw some incredibly beautiful things and pieces, and it had a really big impact on my practice. I found that the forms were so exciting and felt so contemporary, even though they were thousands of years old. It was amazing. And yeah, I came back completely inspired.
I remember the body of work which you created then after was really inspired by your time, and the glazes that you started to use were very celadon-like. Oh yeah, super icy. And yeah, I guess this is a body of work. Also, the work that you graduated from your MA started to show how you work in a really amazingly refined way. There's a kind of a graphic element to your work in that you pare back forms to to essence almost. And this was I remember this body of work. This exhibited at Fresh in BCB 2019. And I remember at that time, before you exhibited in Fresh, you exhibited in New Designers.
Yes.
Then with BCB.
Yeah, so this, when I was doing my MA, I had put myself in this box that I was a surface pattern designer, and that's what I thought my strength was. And I think it was in the run up to 1 year in, the curator of the 1 year in space at New Designers said, you don't need the surface pattern. The shapes are strong enough on your own. And it completely blew my mind that kind of actually that was one of my strengths. And yeah, so this felt really bold for me, kind of putting things out there that were just about the form. But it's sort of become much more of what my work's about.
And actually, just to go back to your time in China, whenever you were in another place visiting museums full of amazing ceramics and seeing another culture's heritage of a material which is so close to your own heritage, did it give you any space to kind of look back on the pottery industry or the heritage from Stoke-on-Trent?
Yes, I guess it's looking at it with fresh eyes, isn't it? Again, I think I've definitely realised over the last sort of 6 months I've taken for granted so much of what I grew up with here, and I think probably China was the start of sort of seeing that fresh in the. So a lot of my work is made in bone china, and I've always assumed that everyone knows what bone china is, because if you're from Stoke, you tend to have a bone china mug in your cupboard, whereas not everybody does, sort of. So that, I guess, inbuilt sort of knowledge that you don't realise is unique to how you've grown up.
Absolutely. And I guess this is really nice, because this brings us forward to the work that you've produced. The point in between.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this body of work was created for a residency funded by the Artist Benevolence Fund, which I was very lucky to undertake at Staffordshire University. So I started this residency in February 2020. At the time, I was absolutely heartbroken when lockdown happened and I had to stop for an indefinite amount of time. But reflecting back on it, actually, I'm really glad that not that COVID happened, but I'm glad that break happened when it did, because I think it made me much bolder. I think I would have played it much safer if that hadn't have happened. I started reflecting on what was happening to me, and I think that really came out in the shapes I was designing. So the one in the middle is called Pivot, and it's sort of that the foot is absolutely tiny, it literally rocks over, and I think it's that feeling of everything changed and nothing felt secure, and kind of I started noticing like how much I was reflecting myself in what I was doing.
That's so beautiful. Those forms are so striking. So did the inspiration for each of those pieces come from how you were feeling or your experience?
Yes, I'm sort of I do it and then I sort of reflect back and sort of see the patterns, but
that's interesting. Often as makers or people who work with material, you speak first through your fingers and through the material, and then are able to find the words later.
Yeah, that's definitely how I sort of.
I love that. And so this was the point in between, and then the next stage, the next step, is that the work that you've produced here with us. Here's some inspiration.
So I'd managed to visit the Potteries Museum once before lockdown, and then
you had a sneak peek behind the scenes.
Yes, and then I managed to go and see the reserve collection. So I know it's only tiny there, but the image on the end is what the reserve collections of the Potteries Museums are like. It's amazing. It's absolute ceramic heaven. They're just wall-to-wall pots. It's amazing. So the two images on the left are from the collections there, and the four on the right are from the Wedgwood Museum. Unfortunately, there have been museums have struggled to reopen around here, so which was quite challenging around all the different lockdowns. But there's sort of certain themes that I sort of picked out that I really loved. So kind of like I really started noticing handles and kind of the beautiful twisted handles I really loved. And animals, kind of like animal finials, sort of. I love that quirky detail. It's amazing. And story, kind of the frog teeth service. I love that the frog is there because the Summer Palace in St. Petersburg is near marshes, and the service was made for Catherine the Great of Russia. It's that location to place was really lovely, as well, and kind of the elegance and the tiny feet, sort of that grandeur.
Absolutely. And whenever I think back, because I remember whenever we were speaking and you were in the development of this work, really wanting to get out there and see museums and art and objects. And we tried to do what we could and fill in the blanks with like online catalogues and archives and such, but it just isn't quite the same. It's the physical museum, it's the physical object which makes a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love seeing things in real life. So kind of, I went to one, I can't remember when it was. At some point I went to the Wedgwood Museum and sat and spent a whole afternoon sketching, and it was I find that so much more informative than sort of seeing things on a screen. So all the images across the top are Wedgwood, but that's because my photos from the Potteries Museum, there's an awful lot of reflections in them and so. But a lot of these objects are kind of, all the potteries borrowed from each other. So there's a lot of crossover that okay, these are one specific manufacturer, but there's so much crossover in what they do, and kind of like particularly the tripod kind of piece on the end. There's so many different versions of that with kind of mythical beasts or dolphins or people holding them up. And kind of the central idea, or the initial starting point, was this idea of reinventing these historical forms, but in my style, and kind of bringing my take to that heritage and sort of updating them for contemporary audience.
Absolutely, and like the images of the works on the top, like you mentioned grandeur earlier whenever we were looking at the images from the Potteries Museum, but that was something that was so important to you, because within that grandeur, like that, you saw Stoke, like you saw, whenever we spoke, that was Stoke past and heritage, that is Stoke now and Stoke in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really loved doing all this research, and kind of one of the things that's really come out for me is that Stoke, the reason the potteries are in Stoke above anything else is because some really, really talented people decided to make pots here and made it famous for it. And I don't know why it's never hit me before, but it's like, well, why can't we do that again? Like, Stoke has the power to kind of regenerate itself. It just needs people to be here and be making. And there's there's so much more kind of compared to when I was growing up. There's so much more of a buzz and so many more artists and like the BCB, and you do projects with schools, and there's so much more happening, and it's more exciting, and like I feel like we're on the road to getting back to there, and I wanted this to be a really hopeful body of work.
It really is, and I love how you used Spode as the kind of the context for exploring this. The Spode work site being a former production factory, now in this period of flux with artist studios there. There's project spaces. We've got BCB ceramic studio there, and our community clay comrades and communities that come and visit us. There is a hotel there, the Potbank. There's the Spode Museum Heritage Trust, Spode Rose Garden. Oh, there's so much there. And so within your work, you've been able to capture a real hopefulness and bring in a beauty to certain details that perhaps you might take for granted on site.
Yeah, so I guess I was using Spode as sort of that metaphor for kind of like past, because it's a beautiful old factory, kind of made thousands and thousands of pots over the years. Kind of it obviously very famously closed just before the first biennial, and what has been fuel for lots of artists with sort of that state of decay and the plants growing all over it, and the pigeons who have colonized it. But then also the future in that there's so much happening there, and sort of Stoke isn't unique in that, is it? That there's so many industries that have gone through tough times and things close, and there's that, I guess it's that flux in between, kind of as they find a new identity, and kind of capturing that, which I wanted to kind of commemorate and also sort of celebrate, because
and share. I remember you being so wanting to share that with others and share your pride. I think this body of work does an amazing job of that. And these are a selection of shapes and colours and materials that you've been using. Some of these are on exhibition as well.
So I call this body of work Trials. Sort of after that, though, I guess thinking of them as tests and experiments, and so these are all thrown in porcelain of different colours, and some glazed, some not glazed. I started throwing tests. I've always thrown. I threw on my BA, so I've always thrown, but throwing became like a way of making maquettes for me during my ABF residency, and just testing shapes really quickly. But I really wanted to bring that sort of energy and show it kind of as a. So it's been really fun, kind of playing with shapes. It feels much freer than kind of doing lots of plaster work and being committed to shapes, because you can change them every time. Kind of, I love the handles in the museums. They're so elegant and they add such drama. So playing around adding handles and
twisting them with the one on the top right.
Yes, I absolutely love the twisted handle. So there had to be a twisted handle one, although that was very hairy making that one.
You've really pushed yourself with this body of work. And if you haven't seen the work, they have some of the most elegant pigeons I've ever seen in my life. So incredibly beautiful and so strong. And like whenever we've seen some earlier images of Laura's work, and I was talking about how you compare back shapes. I mean, just looking back to your original inspiration, like Josiah Wedgwood's first day vases, these incredibly ornate forms and decorative pieces that would never have been used, but would have been so elegant and within somebody's fancy home. But you have a real way, as I said, of paring back to an essence, and there's, these forms are really sublime.
This was intended to be my first day's vases. So these are, I always loved that story that they were made, like Josiah and his business partner knew that they were going to want to remember and celebrate the first day of their new factory. It's like that hopefulness is so palpable. So I kind of wanted to do this is my first day's vases, celebrating where Stoke is, but also so hopeful for the future and celebrating that going forwards. So sort of take inspiration from the original forms, but very much in my own style. And each is individual, or there's 3 of them are decorated with plants that I took photographs of on the SPO site. So one is painted with underglazes, that one is carved, which is something I started doing in China, so it sort of ties back in. And the
others painted, the buddleia.
Oh yeah, and painted slip. And all the pigeons are hand modelled because I wanted them all to be unique. I wanted to try and capture a little bit of their personalities, sort of. But spode pigeons are what I remember, or like spode and pigeons just go together, kind of.
They do, and because Laura's worked with us during install, she will know that we at BCB have a lovely relationship with pigeons. I tell everybody this on my tours. We love the pigeons unless they're inside the hall when we're trying to install the exhibitions and have ceramics unwrapped. We've numerous times chased pigeons from that hall.
It was that tenacity, like that they could sense if the door had been left open for, it was like sometimes it was literally a minute. There would be somebody shouting, please shut that door, and the pigeon would swoop and you'd be like, oh no. It was just that. I kind of admire them, that they just...
Tenacity, that's the best way to describe them. Yes, here's the piece that I was talking about, the piece on the left.
This was cast in jasper, very kindly given by Wedgwood. I found, it was lovely playing with such an iconic clay. It was, my version of the tripod kind of shape that was completely stripped back just to show that sort of drama.
It does. Absolutely stunning, Laura. And so whilst Laura has been producing this new body of work, and yes, it's incredibly ambitious, she's also been undertaking a programme with the Crafts Council. So,
yes.
Yeah, I would love to hear about what your journey's been like on that and the impact it's had.
Yeah, so I've just finished Crafting Europe, run by the Crafts Council. Crafting Business, which is run by the Crafts Council and funded by Crafting Europe. There's a lot of crafting all in one place. But that's been amazing doing it alongside this. It's I've been part of this really strong cohort of makers, and hearing their kind of why they make, kind of, for me, I've always been somebody who's made because I can't communicate what I want to say, kind of, and the last sort of 6 months, I've really got an idea of like why I make, and kind of verbalizing sort of the things I've sort of taken for granted, sort of like my grandma's china cabinet full of seconds with a piece of like fingerprints pressed into the clay, and kind of those early interactions that really got me excited by clay. Kind of talking about that in that really safe space with my cohort has really helped me kind of find my voice, I think, and this body of work. I feel like I've really found my voice as a maker. And
oh wow, sounds both hand in hand. Yeah, it's just provided you. One has provided the creative outlet, the doing, the making, and the other articulating it.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh wow.
Oh, and then this was my final image. So detail is really important to me in my work, and it was really important to me that my lids for the first day's vases would be standalone pieces. So it took about 3 goes of making it to get it to sit right, but they were designed that they would be a little piece in its own right, away from the vase. So
I love that. I really love that, and I didn't know that. It's so lovely to learn that. I have some really lovely questions actually from our community online who've shared them via social media. The first question I'll ask you, though I think you've already answered it somewhat. And the first question is, what was your first encounter with ceramic?
So it was at school, primary school. I had the local high school came in for a day, I think, and we made, I think it was a mask, I can't really remember. And then it was when I went to and did my foundation that I kind of specialised in ceramics.
What was it about it? Do you remember that just drew you in? Was it the freedom that you mentioned earlier, the kind of opportunities that it offered?
Yeah, so I sort of specialised in ceramics because it allowed me to do everything, and so it was like this really pragmatic, not passion sort of driven response. But then, yeah, I think it was actually working with the clay. I just get completely lost in it and realise there was that endless possibility thing. It just fascinated me.
I think many people will share that with you. That's lovely. And the next question is, what is your favourite and least favourite ceramic technique?
I'm really bad. Like, I love variety, so my favourite technique is usually the one I'm doing.
I like that. That's a very good way.
Too much of anything is bad. The one process I really get very fed up of very quickly is polishing. So I polish all my bone china pieces. That gets very tedious very quickly.
Lovely. Number 3 is, do you plan your pieces to turn out a certain way, or do you just go with the flow?
Usually I plan everything down to the last detail. So kind of the first day's vases, that the form was planned, the size, particularly because I work in bone china, the shrinkage is ridiculous. So you have to kind of have a good idea of how big you want it to not end up with something tiny. Although saying that, when I'm turning the plaster shape on the lathe, it does evolve a little bit. There is that sort of, sometimes what looks right on paper does not feel right in real life. I think what I've loved about throwing is that I have a rough sketch, but kind of the shape completely evolves. And some of the pieces I like the best have come from, this isn't working, I'm going to cut the top off, and you're like, oh no, like sort of that sort of freedom to evolve and change.
It's a really nice combination of being able to plan to a certain extent and then following your intuition.
Yeah, I really love this freer way of working.
Oh, that's fabulous. Oh, Laura, thank you. I'd love to open the floor if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask. Anything that you're curious around? What's next? Yeah, good question.
I really want to take this body of work further. I want to develop it further. I love this way of working, and I would love to go on and do a residency somewhere else, maybe abroad. Place is so important to what I do, and I've really realised that I'm really influenced by what I see and where I go. So kind of I want to keep moving and keep developing as an artist.
Oh, that's exciting. Anybody else? Anything to ask? Oh, yeah.
How do you choose your color palette to admire your softness?
I never actually set out to make a certain colour. They've all come from sort of just testing. So the two on either side are the same oxides, but in different combinations and different intensities. I don't know if that makes me a bad or like a bad artist, but kind of, yeah. It all
There's
comes from
intuition in there as well, that you kind of just follow what.
I think there's always like a blue kind of colour palette. I'm never going to be I love your colour so much, Pam. Kind of, but I don't. I'm a calmer sort of palette, but there's just subtleness and elegance.
That was the question I was thinking actually. Your work's all very quiet and calm. I was just wondering why. Where does that come from? What is it that?
It's I think it's because I'm not like that. I'm quite an anxious person, and I think it's sort of it's not a conscious thing for it to be quiet and calm, but it sort of happens, and I think it is sort of because it's the opposite of me. The two comments I tend to get about my work are that they're elegant and they're calm, and neither have been used to describe me ever.
I would.
I don't disagree with that. You come across as very elegant and kind.
Yeah. Oh, Laura, thank you so much for speaking. Is there anything else that you'd like to share, or anything that you'd like to talk about before we finish up? We covered a whole range, but it's been lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. No, I can't think of anything, but yeah, I hope everyone enjoys the BCB. I've been blown away by how good it is.
Oh, yeah, don't forget to stay fresh talent.